because children are suffering and parents are suffering. And I promise not to turn this into a bummer talk, but suffering. And something foundational has to happen in society today. And increasingly, fortunately, as a culture, we are looking to meditation, plural, big, writ large, as a possible approach to address this epidemic of stress and trauma in life. So what I want to do is I want to just take a moment and define some terms. Because how many people here have tried some form of meditation? Yeah, it's almost like you go the other way around. So it used to be thought, I started meditating a long time ago, it used to be thought that all meditations were basically the same. Didn't really matter what you did. First of all, they thought it was just bogus 50 years ago. You're just wasting your time. But then some initial research came out on TM in 1968, 1969, 1970, published in Science and Scientific American, showed that it reduced blood pressure, woke up the brain. So then people begrudgingly said, okay, there's something to meditation. But it was just this general thing. It didn't matter what you did. That was meditation. It was beneficial. Fortunately, in the last 10 or 15 years, brain research, looking at what happens in the brain when we meditate, has revealed some very interesting conclusions or indications. That because we know that every experience impacts the brain in a specific way, if you listen to classical music, it has one impact on the brain. If you listen to electronic music, another impact on the brain. If you watch a romantic comedy, it has one impact on the brain. If you watch David Lynch films, he's back there listening. Has another impact on the brain. Just if you watch other films, Dave. So what they did is they looked at meditation, and they found that there are three basic types of meditation. I think it's very interesting. The first is called focused attention. The second is called open monitoring. And the third is called self-transcending. And before I get into that, I'm going to use an analogy. Everybody with me here? Okay. You're on a little boat, and you're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And all of a sudden you get these giant waves, 30, 40-foot high waves. And you could rightfully think the whole ocean is in upheaval. But the word whole is a bit of a stretch. Because if you could do a cross-section of the ocean out there, you'd realize you got these little, relatively speaking, 30-foot waves, but the ocean in reality is a mile deep or more. And while the ocean by its nature can be turbulent on the surface, the ocean by its nature is pretty darn silent and quiet at its depth. And that is the analogy I like to use for the mind. The surface of our mind is like those waves, choppy waves. And sometimes they call it the monkey mind. I like to call it the gotta mind. I gotta do this, and I gotta do that, and I gotta call him, and I gotta call her, and I gotta make a list, and I gotta find the list. Then I gotta make a new list, and I gotta slow down, but I gotta get going. I gotta get to sleep, but I gotta get, anybody? And so it's a natural human desire. I'd like to have some inner calm, some inner clarity, some inner focus, some inner connectedness, some inner ease, and the operative word there is inner. And the question is there such a thing as an inner? And if so, how do you get there? And so the purpose of meditation, one of the main fundamental purposes of meditation throughout time, was to bring ease or peace or equanimity to the mind. So 3 basic types of meditation. Now this is broad brush because we do want to get to David, but broad brush. The first one I called focused attention. Those are your vipassana, classic concentration forms of meditation, where the attempt is to clear the mind of thoughts or control the mind, focus intently on your breath, on a thought, on a bodily sensation, and it's like trying to stop waves on the surface of the ocean. And that Focused attention meditation, according to research, creates gamma brain waves, which are 20 to 50 cycles per second, very fast, usually in the prefrontal cortex, the left side. And that gamma brain waves comes about. Is this interesting? Okay. Wait a minute. Comes about when, it's interesting to me, when your child is focused, concentrating. Just the brain is working hard. And a focused attention is a cognitive process to control the mind, control thoughts. So that's one. Open monitoring is the second. There are many mindfulness techniques within this. Actually, there's mindfulness in both areas because there's many mindfulness techniques. But open monitoring is and many of you will know this, it's an observational tool. It is sort of emotionally or dispassionately observing your thoughts, your feelings, your bodily functions. You do body scans. You take 10 breaths. Anybody do that sort of thing? Yeah. Very effective tool for a coping mechanism. It's to sort of also take us out of the past or the future. So if you have the thought of Joe, and if you don't know any Joe, but if Joe done you wrong 2 days ago or 20 years ago, and the name Joe comes up, so we learn how to be present, that equanimity of the present and not the past or the future. And when we do that, that creates something called theta brain waves, which are 6 to 8 cycles per second. That's a pre-onset dream. It also, because your eyes are closed, it creates alpha 2 brain waves, 10 to 12 cycles per second in the back of the brain, occipital lobe. Also some beta brain waves, which is sort of waking state. A marvelous coping tool. How to observe the waves rise and fall. The third is self-transcending, transcendental meditation. And in this, we do something interesting. Well, everything is interesting, but we do something else interesting. We recognize that there is a vertical dimension to the mind. We feel things deeply. We know things in our gut. Our intuition tells us something, abstract feeling level, a transcendent level of the mind. We look for transcendent moments. When we hold a newborn baby in our arms, it's a transcendent moment. Time slips away. Sometimes we have that moment with a partner, such intimate communication. It's a transcendent moment. Athletes talk about the zone, where there's a calm and everything's coming out crazy, and yet there's a calm and a silence and actually a happiness. So that transcendent level of us. And in transcendental meditation, we don't mind the thoughts. We don't try to block out the thoughts. And we'll go into more of this a little later. But we learn a technique. We're given a mantra, which is a word or a sound that has no meaning. And we're taught in personal instruction. I'm saying all this to define terms. So when David's talking about this, you have what he's talking about. And we learn how to just let the active thinking mind settle down and access that deepest faint feeling level of me, my own inner nature, which is a big place, it turns out. When that happens, something called the brainwave signature is something called alpha 1. That's 8 to 10 cycles per second, and that is a state of deep settledness and wide awake inside. And because the mind and the body are so intimately connected, when your agitated thinking mind transcends and settles down to that equanimity within, your body gains a state of rest deeper than in many regards than the deepest part of deep sleep. And one thing, and then say a few more things, and we'll turn it over to David. You know what cortisol is? Not a friend. I mean, we do need cortisol to get up in the morning. When we're sleeping, cortisol levels sort of start going down, and then when we're about to get up, then they start creeping back up, because cortisol is a hormone secreted by the adrenals, which sit on top of the kidney. But the problem is we have adrenal burnout. We have so much cortisol we could, flood the city. It is too much cortisol comes about when we feel anxiety, and too much cortisol undermines and compromises the immune system, the digestive system. It floods the hippocampus, where there's many, many receptor sites for cortisol, and that's our memory center. When people get compromising the immune system, that's why when someone's stressed, they get sick. If you get a good night's sleep, cortisol levels drop about 10 to 12%. But when we have that transcendent experience in meditation, cortisol levels drop 30 to 40%. Not magical. It's a mechanism that we all have deep inside that we have not been accessing. And David, you could start coming out. He really has great films. When we access that, a point I wanted to say is, this is not a discussion of either or. It drives me nuts. I've been teaching meditation 45 years. I do body scan, breathing. I do those things. Pranayama, feel the body. Those are fine. It's not people say, well, I do mindfulness, so I don't do this, or I do that. No. It's too small. It's siloing. Particularly with kids, but all of us. We should not be closed off, but there should be criteria. Is it scientifically proven to work? Are there certification of teachers? And so that's the message here. We're talking outcomes. Mindfulness has a cognitive training. Transcendental meditation gives the experience of the transcendent. After you transcend, you can do whatever you want. You can pray. You could read Marcus Aurelius. That came from. Just popped into my mind. Anything. You could do fine. But start with that experience of transcendence. And by way of introduction to David, I want to say one of the last things about the brain that I find really interesting. A creative person, there's now 3 different aspects of they used to think that creativity was like the right hemisphere. Remember that? The right hemisphere is creativity, the left hemisphere is sort of one's the artist, the other's the scientist. Well, it turns out it's not regions of the brain. It turns out it's networks. And there's a network of the brain called the executive control center. It's the prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that you use to focus and concentrate. Then there's another part of the brain. It's not a very interesting word, which is the default mode network. When I first heard that, I said, you could fall asleep hearing that word. But it's also called the imagination network. And it's a part of the brain, connects the front of the back, and it's past, future, and it's the creative center. When the default mode network is activated, the mind is more creative. In our daily life, you can be working hard on a problem and you say, I got to take a break. Just go for a walk, take a hot shower. It's the other part of the brain, the imagination center. Usually, one is operating or the other. There's a thing called the salience network, which turns one on, turns the other off. One is operating or the other. In creative people, both are operating simultaneously. The ability to focus and the ability to roam, wander. And so with that, one of the most extraordinary human beings I know, and a creative genius in par excellence. Please welcome David Lynch.